In 1999, a little girl ran ahead to pick a red balloon and never came back. No screams, no struggle. Just the weightless drift of a moment gone wrong. A father threw away a paper cup, turned around, and she wasn't there. By sunset, her photo was taped to lampposts. By morning, the search had begun, and for the next 25 years, I sat on the same bench every Saturday facing the exact place where she disappeared. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if stories like this ever brushed past your own family or your hometown. Every click helps keep another name from fading into silence. My name's Richard Callahan. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I used to run a secondhand bookshop on King Street above a cafe with copper lights and a slow drip of jazz on the weekends. My daughter Claire was 5. She liked lemon ice sidewalk chalk and singing songs that didn't have endings. Back then, we were just a regular family. Married 12 years, modest house on Rutledge Avenue, white shutters, red door. We didn't lock the gate unless we were out of town, which wasn't often. I mowed the lawn every Sunday. Laura worked part-time at the dental office a few blocks over. Claire had her own shelf at the library. She liked the books with flaps and bunnies and bright yellow spines. I don't remember anything unusual about that last spring. No stranger in the neighborhood, no strange cars. We didn't live in fear. This was Charleston porch swings neighbors who brought peach cobbler and kids who played outside till the streetlights blinked on. Safety didn't feel like a privilege back then. It felt like air. Saturday was always our family day. Claire would wake up first, come thudding down the hall, her feet like soft hammers on the hardwood. Laura packed little snack bags, crackers, raisins, apple slices. I brought the camera. We'd head to the square by 10:00. Watch the street performers, maybe buy a balloon or two. The bench where I sit now. That used to be our snack bench. We'd stop there for lemon ice, let Claire run up to the balloon cart. There was a man there, I forget his name. He always wore a tan vest and gave kids stickers. The square was busy, full of music and chatter. It never felt dangerous. But in the weeks before that day, I remember Claire said something strange. We were walking home from the market and she tugged on my hand and asked, "Daddy, do you hear the music?" I told her I didn't. She just smiled like she knew something I didn't, then skipped ahead like it didn't matter. Another time she asked it again. We were brushing her teeth and she looked up at me through the mirror. "Do you hear it now?" she whispered. I asked what kind of music. She said, "The kind that sounds like stars." I didn't know what to make of it. Kids say things. Then came that Saturday, March 27th. Clear skies. A little too warm for spring. We left the house at 9:15. Claire wore a blue dress, but she wanted the yellow one with butterflies. Laura said it was too cold. Claire pouted, folded her arms, said butterflies don't get cold. She won that round. By 10:00 we were at the square. At 10:12 she asked for a balloon. At 10:13 she ran ahead. And by 10:15 Laura and I looked at each other, both of us waiting for the other to say it first, that we couldn't see her, that we'd lost sight of our daughter. I don't remember the exact moment we crossed the line from calm into chaos. I just know that 1 minute we were circling the balloon cart, calling her name like it was a game, and the next, the sound changed. Everything felt too bright, too loud, and no one around us seemed to understand that something was wrong. Laura walked one way, I walked the other. I thought maybe Claire had run to the swings or doubled back toward the ice stand. But after 5 minutes 10, there was no sign of her. We both started calling louder. Not the playful kind of call, not anymore. It was sharper. Her name broke off in my throat. A woman near the fountain turned and looked at us, asked if we needed help. I said yes, and then everything started moving too fast and too slow at the same time. By 10:35, 2 officers were there. Young, polite, clearly trying to stay calm for our sake. They asked questions. What was she wearing? How tall? Any medical conditions? We told them about the yellow dress, the butterflies, the red shoes. They scribbled it all down. One of them asked if she'd ever wandered off before. I wanted to snap at him, but I didn't. I just said, She was right here. She asked for a balloon. She ran ahead. That was it. The square was cordoned off. They started combing through the park, speaking to vendors, nearby businesses, anyone who might have seen something. There was a man running the balloon cart. I remember he had a bushy mustache and kept looking down at his hands. He said she had come up to him, pointed at the red balloons, but before he could untie one, she turned and walked away. Just walked. He said she didn't look scared. She didn't say anything odd. She just walked. That was the last anyone saw her. There were no cameras facing the right direction. None of the nearby stores had caught her on their footage. One camera inside a cafe picked up Laura and me walking by, holding hands. Claire was just out of frame. The last image we had of her was from earlier that morning, a photo Laura took while Claire sat on the front steps holding a piece of toast. Her hair was still damp from the bath. She had a purple Band-Aid on her elbow. I gave that picture to the police. They printed it on flyers that same afternoon. By 3 hosiery volunteers were already canvassing the neighborhood. It was still daylight when the local news arrived. I stood next to Laura on the steps of the precinct, blinking under the weight of the camera light. She spoke. I didn't. I couldn't. That night our house was full neighbors, friends, officers passing through. Laura's sister flew in from Charlotte. My brother came from Columbia. Everyone wanted to help, and none of it helped. The next few days passed like fog. A scent I couldn't name hung in the air like rain on hot pavement. I barely slept. I walked the same loop through the park over and over. I talked to anyone who might have been nearby that morning. An elderly woman who said she remembered a child crying. A jogger who thought he'd seen a red balloon drifting over the cemetery fence. A teenage boy who said he didn't see anything, but I could tell he was lying. Not out of guilt, just teenage discomfort. The police were kind. They were thorough. They asked if Laura or I had any enemies, if we were going through custody issues, if anyone in our family had ever acted strange around Claire. I answered every question. So did Laura. They checked our phones, our internet history, our finances. I understood why. Statistically, that's where most cases point. But we were clean. We had nothing to hide. Just a missing daughter and an empty bedroom that still smelled faintly of baby shampoo. By the end of the first week, the search had widened to include nearby counties. The dogs came out. Helicopters. Dive teams searched the marshes near the Ashley River, even though no one thought she could have made it that far. I kept showing them the photo, the one from the carousel the week before she vanished. She was wearing the same red shoes. She had frosting on her chin. She was laughing so hard her eyes were closed. That image stuck with me longer than any other. Then came the theories. Some thought she'd been taken by someone who knew us. Others believed it was random, a moment of opportunity. One officer said kindly that children sometimes wander off and get confused, that maybe she was scared and hiding. But there was nowhere to hide. Not in that park. Not in the 10 seconds it took for her to disappear. Laura and I started to fray. Not loudly, quietly, like fabric worn thin from the same movement over and over. She wanted to stay home. I wanted to walk. She believed Claire was alive. I said I didn't know. The tension built in the silence between us. I started sleeping on the couch. She stopped leaving the house. The police came by less frequently. The neighbors stopped knocking. But I couldn't stop hearing it, the thing Claire said to me a few days before she vanished. She'd tugged my sleeve on the way home from the store and asked Daddy, "Do you hear the music?" I told her I didn't, and she looked disappointed. Just a little, like she was hoping I would. I thought it was a game. But then she said it again. "It's okay if you don't." I still do. That line stayed with me. I didn't tell the police, it didn't seem relevant. But it played on a loop in my mind, especially late at night when the street outside fell silent and the air inside our home pressed in too tight. 1 week turned into 2, then a month, then a year. The search faded from the news. The tips stopped coming. Laura and I stopped speaking. We divorced quietly 3 years later. No drama. just an unspoken understanding that there was no way forward together. But I stayed. I kept the same apartment, kept my job at the library cataloging old newspapers, digitizing city records. It kept me close to the facts, gave me something to do with my hands. I went to the bench every Saturday. Same spot, same time. I never looked at the balloon vendor again. He changed, or maybe I did. And then, one afternoon, 25 years later, almost to the day, something changed. I was sitting in my usual spot, drinking the same coffee I always ordered when I heard it. Not just music. A melody, soft, worn, familiar. It pulled at something buried so deep I didn't recognize it at first. But when I turned and saw the boy sitting under the oak tree with a guitar across his knee, I knew. He was playing a song no one else could have known, and my hands began to shake. He didn't notice me at first. I stood still for a moment, trying to steady my hands, trying to decide whether to step forward or turn away. But the melody didn't let me. It pulled something loose inside me, something I hadn't felt in 25 years. I crossed the street. The crowd blurred around me. People were talking, laughing, eating from paper boats, and I moved through them like I wasn't really there. When I got to the edge of the plaza, the music got clearer. Softer up close, but unmistakable. The boy had dark, messy hair, early 20s, maybe sitting cross-legged under one of the oaks. His guitar was worn. He played like he didn't need the notes written down, like the song had always been inside him. That song. The one I used to hum to Claire while she drifted off night after night. I never recorded it, never wrote it down. Laura didn't know it. Claire had asked me once why the stars didn't fall. I told her they were listening. And that line made its way into the lullaby, quiet, simple, just for her. And now it was coming from this stranger's mouth like it had always belonged to him. I waited until he finished. He looked up a little surprised, but not alarmed. "Do you know that song?" I asked. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears, thinner, like I'd forgotten how to speak. The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think I've always known it." That's when I sat down right there on the curb. I didn't mean to. My knees folded and I couldn't stop them. He didn't rush me or press for more, just sat quietly letting me catch my breath. I asked him his name. He said Miles. Miles Morgan. The last name rang a faint bell, not loud, just enough to stir the dust. I didn't have a plan, didn't say anything else. I just told him I needed to go. At home, I went straight to the wall, the one in my back room where I'd kept every report, every clipping, every note. I scanned through names I hadn't looked at in years. There it was, buried in an interview summary dated August 12, 1999. A woman named Celeste Morgan had been part of the early canvassing. She was a live-in nanny at a house 2 blocks from the square. Said she saw nothing unusual that day. But there was a note in the margin. Pencil. Faint. Sister passed away in 96. Raising nephew 3 years old. Name Miles. I reread that 3 times. The rain had started by then, soft against the windows. I sat down in the dark, holding the old paper in my hand, barely able to breathe. I hadn't cried when we held the memorial, not because I didn't want to, but because it all felt too unfinished. An empty coffin, a framed photo on a table, a pastor saying things about angels. But I never believed she was gone. I didn't believe in angels either, not after that day. The next morning I didn't go to the bench. I didn't open the shop. I didn't even make coffee. I sat in the same spot all day, just staring at the name. Celeste Morgan. I hadn't spoken to Laura in 7 years. After the final appeal was denied and the case quietly closed, we stopped calling. She moved to Savannah, started a new family. I never blamed her. She needed something to build on. I couldn't. I'd kept Claire's room intact for almost a decade. Same wallpaper, same stuffed animals, same half-used sticker sheets. Water damage finally forced me to pack it up. But even then, I labeled every box carefully. Claire Evelyn Callahan. The first few years, people still asked, still offered hope. After 5, they stopped mentioning her name. After 10, they started looking at me with that mix of pity and discomfort. I never stopped. I stayed in the city because I'd made a promise. And now suddenly it didn't feel like waiting anymore. It felt like movement. The next Saturday, I returned to the square. Miles was there, same spot, same guitar. He looked up when I approached, smiled, polite but wary. I asked if I could sit. He nodded. I didn't know how to say it. I asked about the song again, who taught it to him. He said his mom used to hum it sometimes, but she passed when he was young. Then he added something else. My sister Abby, she used to sing it when we were little. She said it helped her sleep. I asked for her full name. He shrugged. Abigail Morgan, I think. Evelyn might be her middle name. Why I didn't answer. That night, I searched every corner of the internet for Abigail Morgan. I found a video on Miles's page, a short clip, maybe 20 seconds long. He's playing guitar, and there's a girl singing softly behind the camera, same melody. Just a glimpse of her in the reflection. The voice hit me first. I hadn't heard it in decades, but something in the tone, the lift of it, cut straight through. Then I saw it. Around her neck, a silver locket. Blurry, but the shape was right. I opened the box from Claire's room. Inside, a drawing of a tree, a few glitter stickers, and an empty chain. The locket had been missing for years. I used to think maybe I misplaced it when I packed the room, but now I knew. I returned to the square the next morning. Miles was already playing. I sat across from him. He nodded. I didn't waste time. I told him I needed to talk to his sister. He blinked. Why I steadied my voice. Because I think she's my daughter. He didn't laugh. He didn't get angry. He just stared at me for a long time and said, "Let me talk to her first." That night I sat in my apartment with the music box in my lap. I hadn't touched it in years. I wound it slowly, let the soft melody fill the room. The same song, my song, the only thing that had never changed. I didn't know what was going to happen next. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in the knowing. Like someone else somewhere remembered it too. She reached out first. I didn't expect that. A message through Miles asking if we could meet, just talk. He said she didn't want to wait long. We met in the square, the same one where Claire had vanished all those years ago. It was late afternoon, the light low and soft. She stood under the same oak tree where Miles had played the song. Her hands were tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, her expression unreadable. She introduced herself as Abby. I told her my name. I didn't shake her hand. I couldn't. I just looked at her. Not in a dramatic way, not with disbelief or wonder, just long enough to trace the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes settled on mine, like she was measuring something she couldn't name. We sat on the bench, same bench. She stayed quiet at first, so I started talking. Not everything, just the pieces I thought mattered. The square, the balloon, the last time I saw her, the lullaby, the photo on the carousel. I didn't push. I told her I didn't know for sure. I said the picture of her singing, the voice, the locket, it stopped me cold. I said when I looked at her I couldn't breathe. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, like someone reading a story they half remembered. We agreed to the test that night. Miles helped arrange it. They said it would take a week, 7 days. I didn't expect those 7 days to feel the way they did. Heavy and sharp and still, like the air had teeth. For her, it must have been worse. A life built on one name, one story, now standing on uncertain ground. I didn't call her. I didn't try to follow up. I waited. That's all I'd done for 25 years. I could wait 7 more days. She spent that week digging. I didn't know it at the time. But later she told me about the attic Celeste's attic. Said she hadn't gone up there in years. Not since the funeral. It took her hours just to climb the stairs. She found a few old boxes near the back wall. Inside one was a dress yellow faded with butterflies on the front. She remembered wanting to wear that dress the day she disappeared. Laura had said no. She'd pouted, crossed her arms. Butterflies don't get cold. I hadn't told her that story yet. But when Abby found the dress, something clicked. Tucked into the corner of the box was a hospital bracelet. It read, Callahan Claire E., date of birth, April 23rd, 1994. But all her life, Abby had been told she was born in 95. 1 year missing, 1 year erased. She showed the bracelet to Miles. He didn't know what to say. He believed her, believed something was wrong, but it was too much, too fast. That night she had the dream. Not a nightmare, just fragments. A park, a red balloon, someone calling a name she didn't recognize but somehow understood. A man's voice, herself turning toward it. Then a different voice, softer, lifting her up. She woke up crying. Meanwhile, I couldn't sit still. I walked the city like I used to in the early days before the trail went cold. I visited the address where Celeste had once lived. The family she'd worked for had long since moved, but an older woman across the street still lived there. She remembered Celeste, said she was quiet, strange maybe, stared at the park a lot. When I asked if she remembered anything specific, the woman said something odd. Once, I saw her carrying a little girl, blonde. Could have been her niece, or maybe not, but she walked fast, like she didn't want to be seen. That stuck with me. I went back to my files. I hadn't looked at them this closely in years. There was a security camera still framed from a store down the block. Blurry. Low res. Time-stamped March 27th, 3:14 p.m. A woman carrying a child turning the corner. The woman's face couldn't be confirmed, but the child had blonde hair. Back then it was considered a maybe. Now I was sure. I called the one person I trusted from those early days. Detective Carla Medina. She'd retired, but she kept her word. Years ago, she'd told me if she's ever found, I'll help bring her home. I left a message. She called back the next day, said she'd meet me. We sat in a corner booth at a diner off Rutledge. She looked older, still sharp. I handed her the printout of the security frame. She looked at it, then back at me. You really think it's her? I nodded. She didn't argue, just opened her old notepad and started making notes. If your hunch is right, she said, this is the first real lead we've had in decades. She agreed to reopen the case quietly, unofficially. Just the two of us. No press conferences, just time and patience. The next few nights I barely slept. I waited by the phone, checked the test status more than once even though I knew it wouldn't help. And then, one Thursday morning, the result came in. Miles called. His voice was tight. He didn't say anything at first, just told me to meet them. I walked to the square. Abby was already there. She handed me a folded printout. DNA analysis. 99.997% paternal match. She didn't speak. I didn't either. We just stood there for a minute, not in shock, not in joy. Just stillness, like something long frozen had begun to thaw. She looked at me and said, I remember the rabbit. That was all. But it was enough. Later that night I opened a box I hadn't touched in years, pulled out the rabbit, worn gray fur, one ear half torn. I placed it on the table. She picked it up slowly. Her hands were shaking. She held it for a long time. We didn't say much else that night, just sat in the quiet. She told me about Celeste, about the silence, the way she always changed the subject when Abby asked questions. She never said not to ask. She just redirected, gently, repeatedly. And then Abby said something I didn't expect. She never should have had me. I shook my head. She didn't have you. She took you." She looked down at her hands. "You never stopped looking." "I said I didn't know how to stop." She didn't reply. But when she left that night, she took the rabbit with her. The next morning, she asked if she could read the rest of the files. I handed her everything. The photos, the police notes, the maps, and at the bottom of one folder, tucked between two old case memos, she found something I hadn't noticed before, a name scribbled in a different hand. Janice. No last name, no context, just a note Janice knows more. Abby looked up at me and asked, "Who's Janice?" I said I didn't know. But something about the handwriting felt familiar. She took the file with her. I watched her go a bag over her shoulder, the rabbit peeking out the top. And for the first time since Claire disappeared, I wasn't just remembering. I was learning again. The questions weren't over. They were just beginning. I didn't hear from Abby for 2 days after she took the file. I didn't want to push. She needed space, and I knew how quickly too many answers could turn into too many questions. On the 3rd day, she called. Her voice was flat, quiet. She asked if she could come over. When she arrived, she was carrying a small notebook in one hand and something wrapped in a kitchen towel in the other. She unwrapped it carefully and laid it on the table, the music box. I hadn't seen it in years. Still played the same lullaby when you turned the key. She didn't say much at first, just opened the notebook and flipped to a page where she'd copied something down in long, even handwriting. A note, different ink than the files, different tone, too. Short, sharp. It read, "She doesn't know, she never knew. Don't tell her the truth." It was signed only with a dash, but Abby said she recognized the handwriting. Said it belonged to a woman named Janice, Celeste's best friend, growing up, the one who stayed with them sometimes when Celeste traveled for work. Aunt Jan, she called her. Someone who never raised her voice. Who made French toast with powdered sugar. Who once taught her how to braid hair. Abby stared at the note for a long time before saying, "She helped hide it." I asked where the note had come from. She said she found it tucked inside the journal Celeste left behind, between pages, not at the end, like someone added it after the fact. I offered to go with her to see Janice, but Abby said she wanted to do it alone. I understood. Some things needed to be faced without someone waiting in the car. She came back the next evening. She looked different, not upset, not angry, just changed. Said Janice didn't deny any of it, didn't even try. When Abby confronted her with the note, Janice just sat down and said, "You were never supposed to find out this way." And then she told her something that neither of us had considered. That Celeste hadn't taken Claire out of loneliness, not just out of grief, but out of fear. Abby said the words felt like they were spoken through water, distorted, impossible. Janice told her that Celeste took Claire because she was afraid of the girl's father. Not me. That's what she said. Not Richard Callahan. Someone else. Abby thought she misheard. She said, "You mean Richard, right?" Janice shook her head. "No, sweetie. I mean your biological father." That was when the ground started to shift again. Abby brought the notebook with her. She flipped to a section she'd marked with a paperclip. I read it twice before the words made sense. Celeste had a sister, Rebecca. That much I already knew. But what I didn't know was what happened to Rebecca. According to Janice, Rebecca ran away at 17, pregnant, unmarried. Wouldn't say who the father was. Said he was dangerous. Said she had to leave. She cut off the rest of the family, disappeared for almost a year. Then one night she called Celeste. She'd had a baby, named her Claire. Said she was scared and didn't know who else to trust. 2 months later, Rebecca was found dead in a motel room outside Atlanta. Overdose. Ruled a suicide. But the baby was already gone. Janice told Abby that Celeste had driven out the week before. Said she couldn't let the baby be alone. That the man who got Rebecca pregnant might still be looking. So she took Claire. Drove back to Charleston. changed her name, raised her as her own. Abby stared at me while I read all of this. I didn't know what to say. It didn't make sense. The DNA test was clear. I was Claire's father. There wasn't room for error. But Janice had spoken with certainty enough that it shook Abby's trust in everything again. She asked me directly, "Is it true? Were you ever involved with Rebecca?" I didn't answer right away. I walked into the next room, sat down, and tried to remember the year. It had been a long time ago, before Laura, before the store, back when I taught high school English. Rebecca had been one of my students. She was quiet, talented, 17. I was 28. I told Abby the truth. I didn't dress it up. I didn't explain it away. I told her we'd gotten close, too close, and when she disappeared, I didn't know she was pregnant. I never heard from her again. I thought she'd just left. And when Claire vanished, I had no idea who she really was. Not until the song. Not until the face. Not until her. Abby didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked if I ever wondered why Rebecca left. I said yes. I told her I thought about it for years. But I was too ashamed to look for her. And by the time I found out about Claire, it was already too late. She nodded once and stood up. She didn't leave right away, just walked over to the window and stared out at the square. The light was fading. People were heading home. She said, "So I wasn't stolen. I was delivered." That was the first time she used that word. Delivered. It hung in the air between us. Not stolen, not lost, not taken. Just passed from one desperate woman to another. Out of fear, out of love, out of something neither of them could explain. She stayed quiet for most of the evening. When she left, she took the notebook with her. I sat for a long time after she was gone, trying to piece the edges together, trying to understand how two timelines that had never intersected now fit like they were made from the same wood. Celeste never told me, never wrote my name in the journal. Rebecca never reached out. But somehow, through the locket and the song, through Miles and the bench, all the parts had found each other, even if the story still wasn't whole. The next day, Abby called Carla Medina, told her everything. Carla listened, took notes, didn't interrupt. When Abby finished, she said, "We'll need to test again. This time we compare against both men. The biological father Janice described if he ever existed in Richard." Abby agreed. So did I. The second test took 10 days. When the results came in, there was no ambiguity, no split percentages, no doubt. Paternal match 99.997%. Richard Callahan. Confirmed biological. Abby read the report in my kitchen. She didn't cry. She didn't speak for a full minute. She just sat down, slowly folded the paper and placed it next to the music box. Then she said, "Then who was Janice talking about?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew what came next. We weren't just looking for how Claire vanished. We were looking for why no one wanted her found. Hoy ChatGPT. After Abby read the test results out loud, she just sat at my kitchen table for a long while, staring down at the paper. Her hands rested flat as if she was waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that might make more sense. I could see her trying to piece together all the stories she'd been told, Celeste's, Janice's, Rebecca's, mine, and weigh them against the evidence right in front of her. Every so often, she'd glance at the music box, then back at the note in Janice's careful script, the one that said, "She doesn't know." She never knew. Don't tell her the truth. The air felt thick, like there were more voices in the room than just ours. Neither of us tried to fill the silence. Eventually, Abby asked to see Celeste's journal again. I pulled it from the stack of files we'd gathered over the past weeks. She read slowly, tracing her finger along each line as if searching for a detail she might have missed the first dozen times. I watched her pause at a passage about Rebecca, the way Celeste described her sister as reckless, brilliant, and already running before the rest of us could catch up. She flipped through the entries about the months leading up to the day Claire vanished and stopped at the page that simply read, "If anything happens, keep her safe." Abby let her hand linger on that line. I thought about how much trust and fear must have tangled in Celeste's mind, and how heavy the burden must have been to carry someone else's child convinced you were saving her. When Abby closed the journal, she looked tired but steady. She said she wanted to talk to Janice again, but this time she wanted me there. I agreed. And the next afternoon we drove to Janice's house, a narrow 2-story with fading green shutters on the east side of town. She answered the door before we knocked, almost like she'd been waiting. She invited us into the living room and didn't offer coffee, just gestured to the couch. Janice was smaller than I remembered, hair pulled back, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. Abby handed her the test result without a word. Janice read it, didn't flinch. She said she believed us, but she also believed what Celeste had told her. She said sometimes people lie because they're afraid. Sometimes they lie because the truth is heavier than anyone knows how to carry. Abby asked why Celeste never reached out even after Rebecca died. Janice said she had tried more than once, but there was always this worry that someone else might be watching. She never gave details, just kept saying that some secrets kept you alive. Janice told us about the day Celeste brought Claire home, said she was jumpy, kept looking out the window like she was sure someone was going to come knocking. Janice never met Rebecca's boyfriend, never even knew his name, but she remembered the way Celeste talked about him like she was more scared of what he might do than what the police could. Abby listened, not interrupting, letting the story run out. When Janice finished, she didn't apologize. She just asked if we wanted to know where Celeste kept the old files. Abby nodded. Janice led us upstairs to a guest room that hadn't changed much since the 1990s. She pulled a battered cardboard box from under the bed. Inside were newspaper clippings, letters, a faded photograph of Rebecca holding a newborn hospital records, even an envelope with my name on it that had never been mailed. Abby dug through each layer carefully. She found a receipt from a motel outside Atlanta dated just 2 weeks before Rebecca died. She found letters from Rebecca to Celeste, most of them short, rushed, full of nervous handwriting and crossed-out lines. One letter ended with, "Don't let him find us." Abby folded that one and put it in her jacket pocket. We brought the box home and spent the next 2 nights sorting through it, looking for anything that might help us fill in the gaps. I made notes on a legal pad trying to reconstruct the days around Claire's disappearance. A pattern started to emerge. Celeste always moved every few months during those early years, never settling for long. Even after she returned to Charleston, she kept Claire's birth date a year off, always said it was for school records, but now it felt more like she was erasing the trail. I asked Carla Medina to meet me at the apartment. She brought her old case notebook and a thick file labeled Callahan, 1999. We sat at my dining room table, surrounded by evidence. Carla listened as Abby and I explained what we'd learned from Janice, how the timeline kept twisting back on itself. Carla said she remembered a retired detective who'd worked the case in the early days, Ronald Bixby. He'd been methodical, stubborn, but was reassigned not long after Claire disappeared. She said she'd reach out. That evening, Carla called back with an update. Bixby remembered a woman Celeste's description who had come to the station not long after the investigation went cold, asking about abandoned children, trying to get access to files, saying she was doing research for a friend. Bixby had found her nervous, distracted, and had written a note about it, but it ended up buried in the case file and never followed up. Carla found the note tucked between evidence logs. Woman mid-30s. Nervous asks about missing abandoned children. Possible connection. Watch list. That was all. We added it to the growing stack of puzzle pieces. That night, Abby had another dream. She told me about it the next morning over oatmeal and black coffee. In the dream, she was standing in the park holding a red balloon sunlight flickering through the trees. She could hear two voices, a man calling her name. Then a woman's voice, higher and softer, saying, "I've got you now." She woke up feeling unsettled, as if something in her memory was starting to break loose. I asked if she wanted to visit the old park. She said yes. We went together that afternoon, walked the same path Laura and I had walked all those years ago. The square hadn't changed much. The benches were newer, but the trees were taller. Abby paused near the spot where the balloon vendor always set up, closed her eyes, and breathed in slow. I waited beside her, saying nothing. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and said, "I remember the voice. Not just yours. Someone else." She lifted me up and said I'd be safe now. We walked the rest of the way in silence. When we got home, Carla called. She'd gotten a voicemail from Abby, 3 words, "I remember everything." Carla came over, and Abby handed her the rabbit, the locket, and the letter from Rebecca. Carla read through them, then sat back in her chair. "We need to find out who else knew," she said. I agreed. I watched Abby holding the old music box, the rabbit tucked under her arm, as if she was bracing herself for what we might find next. The feeling in the room had shifted, less of a mystery now, more of a reckoning. I felt it too in my chest, a kind of pressure building. For the first time, the question wasn't just what had happened. It was who had chosen to hide and who had chosen to look away. Abby spent the next few days moving through the apartment like she was floating somewhere between 2 worlds. She kept the rabbit and the locket close, sometimes slipping them into her jacket pocket when she left the house, sometimes just resting them beside her while she worked at the kitchen table. She started to write again, not in the way you keep a diary, but more as if she was trying to chart out the shape of her own life, names, years, places, questions she never knew to ask until now. In the evenings, she'd sit with Carla and me, the 3 of us surrounded by stacks of files, coffee mugs going cold, the music box sometimes playing quietly in the background. Carla went back through every case note from the old investigation, piecing together what she could from faded pages and half-remembered details. She called Bixby again and asked about the early days after the disappearance, whether he remembered anything odd about the way the search faded out, whether anyone had pressured him to let the case go cold. Bixby said he'd always thought something was off, Celeste showing up at the station, asking about missing kids, the odd gaps in the timeline, but he'd never been able to get anyone to dig deeper. Abby listened without saying much, her hands folded in her lap. One night she said she wanted to see Janice again, not to confront her, but just to ask her if there was anything else, anything at all that hadn't come to light yet. Janice invited her for tea the next afternoon. I waited at home, staring out the window at the city moving on as if nothing had ever happened. When Abby came back, she looked exhausted. She sat down at the table, put her hands flat on the wood, and told me what Janice had said, that Celeste had never intended for Claire to be lost, that in those last weeks before Rebecca died, Celeste had promised her sister she would keep Claire safe at all costs, and if that meant disappearing, so be it. Janice told Abby that in the end, Celeste was more afraid of the world Claire came from than the one she created for her. She said Celeste believed she was saving you, not stealing you. Abby nodded, but her eyes were wet, and she didn't speak for a long time. That night after dinner, she went through the rest of Celeste's journal. She found a page she hadn't noticed before, tucked into the back cover, folded over and taped shut. She peeled it open carefully. Inside was a short letter addressed to Claire in Celeste's looping script. It said, "If you ever read this, I hope you'll understand. I did what I thought was right, even if it was wrong. I wanted you to be safe. I hope you find your way back no matter how long it takes." Abby handed it to me without a word. I read it twice, then folded it and placed it beside the test results on the kitchen counter. There were no more confessions left to find in the journal. That was the last secret Celeste had been able to put into words. A few days later, Abby called Laura. She told her she was ready to talk, but wanted to do it in person. Laura drove up from Savannah the next day, arriving just before noon. I stayed home, gave them space. They met at the same park where Claire had vanished. Abby wore the yellow dress with butterflies. She said it was tight in the shoulders, but she wanted Laura to see it. Laura broke down when she saw her, covered her mouth, then hugged her like she was afraid to let go. Abby told me later that Laura kept whispering "my baby" over and over like she was trying to reach back through time and hold on to the daughter she lost. They walked the park together, retracing those last steps. Laura apologized for not being able to protect her. Abby told her she had always felt loved, even when she didn't know why. When they returned to the apartment, Laura and I stood in the kitchen, awkward at first, but eventually she thanked me for never giving up. I told her I didn't know how to do anything else. Laura didn't stay long. She drove back to Savannah that evening, but promised to visit again soon. That night, Abby sat on the porch, the music box open beside her, the old rabbit in her lap. She called Miles and told him everything. The test, the journal, Janice, Laura. She asked if he remembered the song she used to sing when he was small. He said he remembered every word, even the parts she made up. They laughed together. I listened through the open window, the sound of their voices low and easy, finally free from all the secrecy that had tied them up for so long. A week went by. The story made the local news, just a few lines about a missing child found alive after 25 years, no details, just a name. Abby didn't want interviews or cameras. She started volunteering at the children's library. She said she wanted to help kids find their way back to the stories that made them feel safe. She played the music box for them during story hour. Sometimes she sang the lullaby. The kids asked where she'd learned it. She told them it was a song that had been hidden for a long time, waiting to be heard again. One evening, as the sun was setting, Abby came into the living room carrying an old drawing she'd found tucked behind the bookshelf. It was a child's sketch, faded crayon, a girl on a swing, a man holding her hand, a red balloon floating above them. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, it read, "Don't forget me." She handed it to me, and I felt a weight lift that I didn't know I was still carrying. Abby smiled and said, "I think I remember this day." For the first time in decades, I believed her. Later, as we sat together listening to the quiet, Abby asked if I regretted anything. I told her I regretted the years we lost the things I couldn't change, but not the love that had kept me looking. She nodded. I watched her watching the dark come down her face, calm, her eyes steady. She said, "I think I'm finally home." I believed her. Before we turned in, Abby asked if I would sit with her at the bench on Saturday just like before. I said I'd be there. We didn't talk about what might come next. We just let the silence settle around us gentle for once and waited for morning. The first Saturday after Abby came home, we walked together to the square. It felt different now, not like a vigil or a ritual, but like the start of something else. She carried a thermos of chai, I brought black coffee, and we sat on the bench that had once been my anchor. The morning was clear and a little cool, the way Charleston turns gentle just before the real heat sets in. Around us, the city moved on, as always, kids running for the carousel, couples with strollers, someone laughing near the fountain. For years, I had measured time by the sound of that square. Now I watched Abby watch it, her gaze steady the lines of her face, both familiar and new. We didn't talk much. I think we both understood that words wouldn't be enough for what was settling between us. After a while, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sketchbook. She'd drawn the square, the oak tree, even the old balloon cart. She had a good eye, she'd always had it even as a child, but now her drawings carried a kind of quiet that I recognized. She said she was thinking of making something out of all the pieces of her life. Songs, drawings, memories that didn't quite fit. I told her that sounded right. She smiled at that. Not a big smile, but real. Later that week, she asked if I could help her sort through the old boxes she'd brought from Celeste's attic. We worked in the living room with the windows open and the music box playing soft in the background. Abby sorted through the paperwork with a patience I envied. Birth certificates, 2 of them, one for Claire Callahan, one for Abigail Morgan. Hospital bills, old school records, a faded Polaroid of Rebecca holding a baby. Abby put the photos in one pile, the documents in another, the letters from Celeste in a third. Sometimes she would pause and just look out the window for a long moment. I think she was letting herself feel all of it, the sadness and the relief and whatever fell in between. She found a letter from Rebecca she hadn't seen before. It was short, written in a shaky hand, and it ended with, "I hope you can forgive me someday." Abby traced the signature, then folded the letter and placed it with the rest. I could tell she was thinking about forgiveness, though she didn't say the word out loud. Carla Medina stopped by with a manila envelope of forms and a quiet congratulations. The department wanted to mark the case as resolved, recovered not closed, and asked if Abby wanted to speak with the press. She said no, and I understood. This was never about headlines. Abby agreed to one interview for the public record, just enough to help other families still searching. Carla thanked her, then hugged her before she left. Afterward, Abby sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the old oak tree. She asked if I remembered planting it, and I told her yes, how she'd picked the spot, how we'd hung the locket on the lowest branch. She said she liked the idea that some things could grow from loss. Miles called one evening. He was putting out his first album and wanted Abby's drawing for the cover a rabbit, a swing a girl with a red balloon. He asked if she'd write a song with him, something new, something about coming back. Abby agreed. They met at the old music store on King Street, worked late into the night, and came home with a melody I hadn't heard before. They played it for me in the kitchen. It was soft, a little unsteady at first, then grew into something stronger. Abby sang with a voice I remembered from before she could talk, something that carried both all the years lost and all the hope still left. The weeks passed quietly. Abby settled into her new rhythm, helping at the children's library, making dinner with me, calling Laura every few days just to check in. Laura came up again to visit this time, staying long enough that she and Abby could walk the square together at dusk. They talked about the things they'd missed, the birthdays unshared, the small holidays that had slipped by. I watched them from the window, once 2 silhouettes moving slowly through the light, and thought about how many years I'd spent imagining scenes like that, never really believing they would come true. Abby and I started going through old home videos, Claire at 3, running down the hall, laughing so hard she fell over Laura, calling her for dinner, my voice behind the camera. Abby would pause the tape, study her own face, and sometimes shake her head like she was seeing a stranger. But after a while, she'd let the film play, let herself remember. She told me she wanted to keep the videos, even the hard ones. One morning, I found her sitting on the porch steps before sunrise, the old rabbit on her lap. She said she'd been thinking about Celeste, about how someone could carry both kindness and fear so tightly in the same heart. She asked if I forgave Celeste. I told her I did not, because it made sense or because it made things easier, but because I needed to. Abby nodded and said she wanted to forgive herself, too. Wanted to stop blaming herself for not remembering, for not seeing the cracks in the stories she'd been told. I told her that was the bravest thing she could do. The day the case was officially closed, Carla brought over a certificate for the file. Abby and I sat at the dining table with the paperwork spread out in front of us. She took out her journal and wrote a note for herself. Found. Not lost. Still here. She tore out the page and tucked it into the back of the music box beside the letter from Rebecca, the faded drawing, and the birth certificate that finally had the right name. That night, as we finished washing the dishes, Abby turned to me and said, "What now? I didn't have a real answer." I said, "We'd just keep living one day at a time." She smiled and wrapped her arms around me, the first time she'd done that without hesitation. I closed my eyes and let it be enough. As the house grew quiet and the city's sounds faded, I realized there was nothing left to look for, nothing left to wait on. Abby was home, and for the first time in 25 years, the silence that filled our rooms was peaceful. There was still one part of the story left, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was ready to see where the echoes would carry us. In the end, what lingers isn't the search, the silence, or even the mystery. It's the quiet shape of ordinary days settling in again. Abby in the kitchen, humming as she pours coffee, the faint creak of the porch swing in the dusk, the soft worn fur of the rabbit she keeps close. I still find myself walking the old route to the bench some Saturdays, but not because I'm waiting for anyone to come home. It's habit, and maybe a kind of gratitude for what was given back. We talk now not just about the years lost, but the ones we still have. Abby has her own way of remembering. She volunteers at the library, reads to children whose worlds are for a while safe and whole. Sometimes she tells the story, never all of it, but enough for hope to shine through. Laura visits more often, and the air between us has softened. I watch them together in the park and know we're building something from what survived. There are scars, of course. There's grief for Rebecca, for Celeste, for the way fear can twist love until it looks like something else. There's guilt for every missed chance and acceptance that not all questions find answers. But there's also forgiveness, sometimes shaky, sometimes sure. And there's the music echoing faintly through these new routines. The lullaby I wrote for Claire plays now in a different key, sung not just for what was lost, but for what was found. It took most of my life to learn that justice isn't always an arrest, a sentence, or a headline. Sometimes justice is the chance to sit in sunlight, to hold someone's hand, to say a real name and have it answered. We can't get back what was taken, but we can live honestly with what remains. Abby says she feels whole for the first time, even with the cracks that let the light in. I believe her. Some days are heavy and some are bright, and most are just quiet in a way I didn't know I could love. If you listened all the way through, I hope you'll take a moment to remember someone whose story still waits for an ending. Leave their name in the comments or just hold them in your heart a little longer. Sometimes that's how the lost find their way home.